Hello, and welcome to episode 7 of Opt to Thrive 8 top tips for a better night's sleep.
Welcome to Opt to Thrive, your go-to podcast for women's wellness in midlife, designed to educate, support, and inspire you to live your very best life. And now your host, Dr. Karina Sims.
Wow, it's a gorgeous day out there. Blue sky, 19 degrees I think it got up to today. Pretty amazing for a winter day. It's getting a little bit breezy now and it's starting to cool off. Got my rose pruning done yesterday. I've never pruned roses before, so a little help from YouTube and my hairdresser, and we'll see how I went. I'm hopeful. Today, we're going to talk about sleep. I mentioned in my previous podcast episode that I was going to do it at some stage soon, and today's the day. Sleep is very near and dear to my heart. I sincerely miss the nights when I could sleep a whole 8 hours at a time. I've always been a really good sleeper. I've never had to think twice about it until the last few years. I've also mentioned in previous podcasts that I have had issues waking up in the middle of the night with a lot of trouble getting back to sleep. My brain often trying to convince me that it's super important that I plan the rest of my life tonight. I have put a lot of time and effort into my sleep, and I have become wiser, and most of the time I am not getting suckered into doing all the planning that my brain wants to do. So I have made it a mission to improve my sleep the very best that I can by learning as much as I can about what's happening and how to fix it. And during this period, I've gotten quite educated around sleep disturbance. So I'm really hopeful that I can give you some really good strategies today in helping you with your sleep. Unfortunately, about half of us are going to have sleep difficulties around this midlife transition period. And sleep disturbance is one of the most common symptoms around midlife. Some of us are only going to have mild issues and maybe have occasional poor nights of sleep, but then there's going to be the rest of us. And some of us are going to have chronic and severe sleep difficulties, which are going to affect our daytime functioning, our quality of life, and maybe even our health. So we're going to talk about how our sleep changes through this midlife period and what we can do to improve it. We're also going to cover some red flags for disorders that we're at increased risk of around this midlife transition period and afterwards. One of these disorders in particular can have a serious impact on our health, so we need to make sure that it's diagnosed and treated properly, so we'll get into that. Now, why is sleep important? I would think most of us would agree that it's just nice waking up feeling refreshed and ready to go. But a lack of sleep can affect our whole body. It can affect our immune system. We know that people who don't get good quality sleep or enough sleep are more likely to get sick after being exposed to a virus, like the common cold. And if we do get sick, a lack of sleep can also affect how fast we can recover from that sickness. We also know that people who suffer with chronic sleep disturbance are at higher risk of heart disease, so heart attacks and strokes, high blood pressure, obesity, and mental health issues. But mental health disorders like anxiety and depression can also cause sleep disturbances. So if you're concerned that you may be suffering from anxiety or depression and have not had this looked into by your doctor, it's really important that you do so. The treatment of the underlying mood disorder can also treat your sleep problem. Okay, to start, I wanted to look at the criteria for diagnosing insomnia. In order to diagnose insomnia, the patient must have a dissatisfaction with sleep quantities or quality, with difficulty either initiating or maintaining sleep, and or have early morning awakening. And the sleep disturbance has to cause significant distress or impairment in social, occupational, educational, academic, or behavioral functioning. It has to occur on 3 or more nights of the week for at least 3 months, despite having an adequate opportunity for sleep. And it cannot occur with another sleep disorder. Now, at this midlife period, frequent awakenings appear to be the biggest problem. But then as we transition through menopause and we become postmenopausal, then difficulty falling asleep is more of an issue for us. Those of us who have trouble with sleep before we hit the midlife transition period are very likely to have more severe symptoms than the rest of us when they do hit the midlife transition. So if that's you, it can be really helpful for you to do your best now to ensure you're doing everything you can to optimize your sleep before you go through the midlife transition period. Before we talk about strategies to help with our sleep, as I said before, there are a couple of sleep disorders that we become more at risk at in midlife, and we'll talk about those now. These disorders can present with similar symptoms to insomnia, and in fact, a good portion of people who have these disorders also have insomnia. So these disorders are obstructive sleep apnea and periodic limb movement disorder. I'll call that PLMD for short. It's a mouthful. One study found that 53% of midlife women with sleep complaints had either obstructive sleep apnea or PLMD or both. Okay, so I just wanted to touch on them. I would imagine that a lot of us are familiar with sleep apnea. Maybe we know people who have sleep apnea, but there's bound to be some of you who aren't familiar with it. So I just want to go through both of these. Sleep apnea is where our airway actually collapses down while we're sleeping and blocks it off so that we're pretty much starving for oxygen and we can stop breathing in our sleep. So people with sleep apnea often have really loud snoring. They could also look like they're choking or gasping in their sleep, and it might even be obvious that they're stopping breathing or having what's called apneas. They're likely to feel unrefreshed when they wake up, tired, fatigued, have poor concentration and focus, maybe even a low mood, and quite often they have excessive daytime sleepiness. Sleep apnea is really hard on our heart, and it can cause high blood pressure, it can increase the risk of heart attacks, irregular heartbeat, stroke, and dementia. It is super important that it's diagnosed and it's managed well. If you're concerned, please see your GP so that you can get a sleep study and get this looked into. All right, so the PLMD, or periodic limb movement disorder, main symptoms of this disorder are poor sleep, daytime sleepiness, waking frequently through the night, and rhythmic movements of one or both of our legs during sleep, with a tightening, bending, or flexing of the knee, the ankle, or the big toe. Typically during the first half of the night, usually in that light sleep. We're going to talk about sleep stages a bit later, so that'll make a bit more sense, but our light non-REM sleep, it can last 2 seconds at a time, repeat every 5 to 90 seconds, and happen at least 15 times an hour. It can vary from night to night in severity, and it can occasionally involve the hips and the upper arms. Now, this is different than restless leg syndrome. That occurs when you're awake. With restless leg syndrome, you get this uncomfortable tingling or crawling sensation in the legs and this uncontrollable urge to move them in order to feel some relief. With PLMD, the legs repeatedly jerk or twitch, but it's in your sleep, so you're not aware of it. So it's usually your partner that picks it up. They can have different treatments, so you need to see your doctor to be tested if you think you might have one of these issues. Okay, so before we can really kind of dive into the strategies for helping with our sleep, I think it's important to understand how our sleep mechanism works. So we've probably all heard about the circadian rhythm, and that's only kind of half of what's at play behind the scenes to help regulate our sleep. Our sleep is regulated by an interplay of two mechanisms: the homeostatic sleep drive. Homeostasis means equilibrium or balance. Our bodies are constantly working to keep lots of physiological processes in balance, so to achieve homeostasis, and sleep is just one of them. The longer that we're awake, the more our bodies will tell us we need to sleep to balance out the sleep and wakefulness. So after a period of sleep deprivation, we're more likely to sleep longer and deeper to make up for the deprivation. There are certain times when our body has a higher drive for sleep, like when our immune system is fighting off an infection, or we've had more physically or cognitively stimulating experiences. So that sleep drive, combined with our circadian rhythm, or our body clock, work together to regulate our cycles. When you think of circadian rhythm, I think we often think of just our sleep-wake cycle, but circadian rhythms are a 24-hour cycle that regulates all kinds of things in our body: our temperature, our immune system, hormones, metabolism, our cognitive function, our body's reaction to stress. Our circadian rhythm looks at cues in our environment to regulate these processes. The most powerful cues are light and darkness, but other cues are our meal times, our exercise, our social interactions, our daily routines, and the stress in our life. But in terms of our sleep-wake cycle, the light and darkness cues are going to be very important. In general, in terms of our sleep-wake cycle, as the sun goes down at night, our brains start to produce melatonin, and that's a hormone that induces us to become sleepy. Our core body temperature drops, and that causes us to become less alert. In the morning, as exposure to light increases, melatonin production drops, our body temperature rises, and this stimulates wakefulness. Now, another major player in this sleep-wake cycle with melatonin is cortisol. Now, you probably remember cortisol from our last talk. Cortisol is often known as the stress hormone. It helps prime us for danger when our body's fight or flight mode is activated. We've talked about that before. It can also be a good thing, and it can give us a short-term boost in energy and focus. And in terms of our sleep-wake cycles, our cortisol levels fall in the evening to promote sleep and restoration, and then in the morning it increases to promote wakefulness. But if we have high cortisol levels in the evening, that can cause us to have a lack of sleep. And then this lack of sleep can actually increase our cortisol levels. And then these high cortisol levels can perpetuate sleep disorders like chronic insomnia and sleep apnea. But cortisol isn't the enemy of sleep. In fact, you need a healthy cortisol rhythm to keep your sleep cycle in check, just like we just talked about. But if cortisol levels are too high at the wrong times, like I just mentioned in the evening, you could have trouble sleeping. That could keep you awake during the night. You could have sleep fragmentation, so you're waking up through the night, or it can decrease your deep restorative sleep, or it can reduce the amount of sleep you're getting, or just cause insomnia, period. If you don't sleep when your body tells you to, your circadian rhythms can get out of alignment. Things that can disrupt our circadian rhythm are sleeping for long periods during the day, being a shift worker, traveling across time zones, having irregular bedtime, when we're ill, when we have stress, if we have frequent sleep disruptions, or if we're sleeping in a noisy or a bright sleep environment. So those are a few little clues as to things we're going to talk about when we talk about strategies and sleep hygiene to help us sleep better. So as we talked about before, a lot of hormones work around the circadian rhythm. So it's really important that we have a consistent, stable one. When we're sleeping less than we should and we get a disruption of our circadian rhythm, that can also have effects on our hunger hormones, leptin and ghrelin, and it can make us hungrier and make us crave fatty, sweet, and salty foods. It can decrease our ability to respond to insulin and also make us less active. And all of these things, will lead to weight gain. So really important that we're looking after our circadian rhythms. We're going to talk more about that. So I wanted to just quickly also touch on the sleep stages so that we have an idea of what's being impacted when and why it's important. Okay, so there are two different types of sleep, our REM sleep and our non-REM sleep. REM is rapid eye movement. We either have rapid eye movement sleep or non-rapid eye movement sleep. Our typical sleep cycle would begin with 3 non-rapid eye movements, so non-REM stages of sleep. Then it ends in the rapid eye movement stage. So during our sleep, our body cycles through all of these stages every 90 to 120 minutes, and it does this like 4 or 5 times a night. Our non-REM sleep dominates the first part of our night, and then the REM increases during the second part of the night. But each stage is really important for feeling refreshed and for vital processes in our body and in our brain, like learning and memory consolidation. There are 3 different stages of non-REM sleep. Stage 1, you're easily awoken, and then it goes stage 2 and stage 3, and you're getting harder and harder to rouse. So that stage 3 is that deep sleep. Interestingly, most of us actually wake up several times a night, but we don't realize we've done it. And that's just that stage 1 kind of sleep. Most of us just kind of drift back to sleep without realizing it until you hit midlife. And then I think I've become a lot more aware of the little awakenings that I have through the night. So as I say, with each stage, you become progressively more relaxed. And then the sleep becomes deeper and you're harder to wake. What's happening is your brain waves are becoming slower and slower. And during this stage, our body is repairing our tissues, our muscles, our bones. It's conserving energy by reducing our metabolic rate, lowering our body temperature, and that's allowing our body to recuperate, recover, prepare for the next day. During this non-REM sleep, our brain processes and stores our memories. It's helping to strengthen our neural connections. Our body's producing cytokines, which are essential for our immune function and fighting off infections. And in this non-REM sleep, our body's also regulating different hormones, including those that are going to control appetite and stress. Also during this non-REM sleep, the waste products in our brain are getting cleaned out, and this is helping maintain our optimal brain function and our cognitive performance. Now, our REM sleep, our eyes are moving rapidly under our lids, and everything speeds up. Our heart rate and our blood pressure increase. Our brain activity increases, our breathing rate increases. This stage of sleep is thought to be most important for brain rest and repair, and it's associated with better mental health. Interestingly, it's thought that if we don't get enough REM sleep, it increases our sensitivity to pain. During REM sleep, our brain is consolidating and processing information from the day, so it's facilitating learning and memory retention. This stage is thought to be particularly important for procedural memory, so skills and tasks, and also for emotional regulation. REM sleep is also associated with vivid dreaming. So dreams during REM are thought to help us process our emotions, our experiences, our memories, and this is why it's thought that REM sleep helps contribute to better mental health and allowing us to cope with stress, trauma, and complex emotions. REM sleep also helps regulate our neurotransmitter systems in our brains. So serotonin and norepinephrine, those are the important neurotransmitters for mood regulation. During REM sleep, our body also undergoes this temporary muscle paralysis so that we can't actually hit anyone or act out in our sleep, which is nice. So even though non-REM sleep focuses a lot on physical restoration, REM sleep also has a role. It helps regulate our body temperature, our cardiovascular function, and our hormone levels. All right, so let's get into sleep hygiene and what we can do to help our sleep. You may have heard the term sleep hygiene before. Sleep hygiene is all about maintaining a healthy circadian rhythm. Okay, so time for sleep hygiene tip number 1. It's really important that we have a regular bedtime schedule to the extent that it's possible, eating our meals, going to bed, and waking up at the same time every day. There was a study published by the Journal of the American College of Cardiology a few years ago, and it found that older adults between the ages of 45 and 84 with an irregular sleep schedule had nearly double the risk of developing cardiovascular disease compared with those who had a regular sleep schedule. I thought that really kind of hammered home the idea that we really do need to have a regular sleep schedule that's going to really support our circadian rhythm. Okay, sleep hygiene tip number 2, implementing a bedtime routine. So a bedtime routine tells our brain that it's time to get ready to shut off and go to sleep. The recommendation is that we pick 1, 2, or 3 relaxing activities like meditating, doing a relaxation exercise, taking a bath or stretching, and do them before bed every night. So my bedtime routine, I brush my teeth and wash my face, change into pajamas, get into bed. At the moment, because it's so freaking cold, turning on the electric blanket before I do these things, and then I get into bed and I read a book. Now, some of the recommendations are that you don't do anything in your bed that doesn't start with an S, that you only use your bed for sleep, sex, and sickness. But reading a book in bed really helps me drift off to sleep quite easily. So it works for me. If it's stimulating for you, then don't use it. My routine is that I keep a book on the go right next to my bed. I also keep a notepad there with a pen so that if there's anything really pressing that I want to make sure that I don't forget, rather than unlocking my phone, being exposed to the light of my phone or getting sucked into social media or something else on my phone, I can write it down in my notepad, and then tomorrow I'll be able to look at that. But I keep a book on the go, interesting enough to read every night, but not so stimulating that I can't put it down. Now, I made a mistake recently, a few months ago. One of my girlfriends mentioned that she had read a book that she just loved, and we have similar tastes in books, so I just went right down and got the book. Had no idea what it was about. I really don't like watching trailers on movies because I think they give too much away. So I'm happy enough. She liked the book. I'm sure I was going to like it too. So I opened it up and started reading and immediately thought, oh no. So it's a book, The Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. So immediately realized that it's, a dragon fantasy book, which is not something that I'm really have ever really been into. But I thought, well, okay, she really liked it. I'll get through the first chapter and I'll just see how I go. And then I couldn't put it down. So at midnight, I was forcing myself to close the book. So don't do that. I usually keep a book that's, good enough that I can read a few pages before bed and I want to read it. It's interesting enough, but not so interesting that I can't put it down. And that routine really works for me. I go right off to sleep, usually within 2 or 3 pages. Sleep hygiene tip number 3 is to get regular physical activity. Haha, bet you didn't see that one coming. Really good to get it during the day. Some people find that if you exercise within a few hours of bedtime, it can affect their sleep. And certainly it can increase cortisol levels. So experimenting with timing could be helpful. I know I'm probably starting to sound like a broken record here, but we do know that women who are physically active, it's proven that they experience less awakening during the night, they have better quality of sleep, and they have decreased rates of insomnia. So ladies, you've got to get out there and get exercising if you're not already. Sleep hygiene tip number 4. We kind of touched on this one a bit earlier, but naps, especially late in the afternoon, that can really interfere with your ability to fall asleep at bedtime. If you do take a nap, just try to keep it short. I think less than 20 minutes or, just a quick power nap. Okay, time for sleep hygiene tip number 5. Avoiding screens and bright lights before bed. So any light really can inhibit melatonin production. So it's important to try to avoid light exposure when you're trying to wind down. For my reading at night, I have a bedside lamp that has a soft light, which is really important too. In fact, dimming the lights in your house about an hour before bed can be a helpful part of your nighttime routine to help with your melatonin production. But light is really important during the day, especially in the morning. So if you can get outside into the direct sunlight as soon as possible, again, that really just helps support that circadian rhythm. Taking a walk in the morning is a win-win here. So you get your exercise and you get out into the sunshine and get some sun on your face. If you feel tired during the day, a little trick is getting outside. Maybe a quick little 5-minute brisk walk while getting some sunshine can really be a boost. Tip number 6 for good sleep hygiene is avoid heavy meals in the evening. So try not to eat for a couple of hours before bedtime. Sleep hygiene tip number 7 is to avoid caffeine after lunch. It's probably a good time to stop drinking any caffeine. And now for tip number 8. I'm going to hear a few groans, but alcohol and sleep, especially around midlife, is just a bit of a nightmare, really. A lot of women find around midlife that they just cannot tolerate alcohol the way that they used to. What we know about alcohol is that it can decrease our body's sensitivity to those cues that we talked about, so daylight and darkness, and then can also trigger shifts in our body temperature and can affect our melatonin. So when you go to bed with alcohol in your system, you're really likely to get a bit more of that really deep sleep and less REM sleep than usual, but only initially. Later in the night, once your body's metabolized the alcohol, you're more likely to experience more of that stage 1 sleep, so that really wakeful sleep. So not restful, not restorative. If you're practicing really good sleep hygiene and you're still having difficulty getting to sleep, there are a couple of other things that you can do. I've talked about before how that I wake up in the middle of the night now, pretty much every night to use the loo, and that my brain decides that it wants to plan the rest of my life. So I have gotten very good at ignoring my brain and then getting myself back into bed. And I've talked about on previous episodes, but my trick is as soon as I get back in bed, I do 3 box breaths and then I start progressive muscle relaxation. You can do meditation, you can do guided imagery. There's lots of things that you can do, but the trick is just trying to get yourself away from your brain and the things that it's thinking. If you do choose to do a meditation or a relaxation exercise, then just be kind to yourself. If your mind starts to wander when you catch it, just bring it back. Don't get too upset with it because, again, like we talked about, you can increase those stress hormones and then wake yourself up even further. So just kindly bring it back to where you were or start again and keep going. If you haven't fallen asleep in a roughly 20 minutes, do not watch the clock. But if you think it's been about 20 minutes and you're not falling asleep, then it's important that you get out of your bed and you go and do something that's mind-numbing and boring, like ironing, some reading in a different part of the house. So I have done this twice where I've gotten out of bed, I've gone to another room, I've read my book, which I know, like I said before, will make me sleepy, and then I've gone back to bed, and that has really helped a lot. But the idea is not to associate your bed with anything other than sleep, sex, and sickness, as we talked about before. Staying in bed and tossing and turning and agonizing can condition your brain to have more anxiety around bedtime. So really important that you don't allow that process to happen. Now, if all else fails, none of this stuff is working and you're just really struggling, there is a treatment that is very useful for insomnia, and it's cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. We've talked about cognitive behavioral therapy before with insomnia. Cognitive behavioral therapy can be very effective. So we've talked about how cognitive behavioral therapy is really challenging unhelpful thoughts. Agonizing and expecting sleep difficulties will only make insomnia worse. Worrying about getting to sleep or how tired you're going to be just floods your body with adrenaline, and before you know it, you're wide awake again. You could do some of this work on your own. There are some GPs that do it, and there are some psychologists that specialize in it as well. But certainly we have talked about how powerful it can be pulling unhelpful thoughts out of your head and cleaning them up, and this is one of those areas that you can do it. I'll also just touch on hormone replacement therapy. Super interesting. What is happening behind the scenes with our hormones can have so much impact on our sleep. In this midlife transition, our bodies experience decreased production of 3 hormones in particular, so estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone. Hormone replacement therapy is usually made up of estrogen and progesterone unless you don't have a uterus, and then you would generally just have the estrogen component. What we know about progesterone that's so interesting is that it actually has what we call anxiolytic, so lyses anxiety, gets rid of anxiety. So it has anxiolytic and sedative properties. Estrogen's effects on the body are a bit complex. Estrogen is used in so many different processes in our bodies that the relationship with sleep is a little bit more complex. But we do know that estrogen can decrease the time it takes to fall asleep. It can decrease the amount of awakenings we have during the night, and it can increase the amount of time that we're able to sleep. So those are all functions completely separate from the fact that it's really, really good at helping decrease the amount of hot flushes a woman has, which can also be very detrimental to our sleep. Hormone replacement therapy most of the time improves sleep for women who are having problems with their sleep. So that's worth having a think about, having a discussion with your doctor about whether or not you're a candidate for that. If you're still struggling despite having really cleaned up your sleep hygiene and doing all of those things that we've talked about. Okay, so there you have it. My 8 top tips for a better night's sleep, plus a couple little bonuses thrown in there. I hope this has been helpful for you, and like I always say, if you can think of someone who this might also be helpful for, please pass it on. And by liking and sharing the podcast, that also makes it more visible for people who are looking for this information. Thank you so much, guys, for all your support. I'm just getting some beautiful feedback. I really do appreciate your feedback, if it's either positive or some helpful constructive criticism, either one. I'm so new at this. I'm learning all the time, and I want it to be the best that it can be and as helpful as it can be. And the way to do that is really to be listening to you guys. So please sing out. Let me know what you think. And with that, I'll sign off. I hope you have a great day. I hope you have a great couple of weeks. And until then, I hope you opt to thrive. The Opt to Thrive podcast is designed for information purposes only and is not engaged in the giving of medical advice. The information provided on the podcast should not be used for diagnosing or treating a health problem or disease. In no way should the information provided by Opt to Thrive be considered medical advice, and at all times the advice of a medical professional should supersede recommendations from Opt to Thrive. If you have or suspect you may have a health problem, you should consult your healthcare provider. The views expressed in this podcast are purely that of Dr. Sims and do not in any way reflect those of the institutions she contracts her medical services to.
Thank you for listening to Opt to Thrive. If you've enjoyed listening, please rate and share the podcast. You can visit our website at opttothrive.com and leave a comment for any subjects you would like to hear more about.